Um, my name's Oliver Heath. I'm an architectural and interior designer. I run a design practice down in Brighton, where we focus largely on health and well-being, and in particular biophilic design. I also spend an awful lot of my time traveling around the country and around Europe, talking about the subject of health and well-being in the built environment and in the workplace to a variety of architects, facilities managers, human resources. And I'm really seeing over the last 5 years an incredible uptake in the awareness and the understanding of the value and the need to incorporate these ideas into the built environment, not just because it's a nice thing to have, because it's an essential component in how we create productive spaces, how we attract people to go to buildings, to go and work for organizations. So today what I'm going to do, I've got about 25 minutes. 25 minutes? I'm going to take 25 minutes. I'm going to talk to you about this idea of health and well-being and how we can integrate it into buildings. In particular, look at the design-related subject, and I specifically say that for a reason, of biophilic design, and how we can improve that connection to nature. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it is, where it's come from, what the key patterns are behind it, and then demonstrate it with some research that makes it, I think, very compelling and starts to create a business case that demonstrates just how important it is for you in the built environment, but also for your clients. Now, over the last few years, what we have seen is the incorporation of a whole new series of building standards. In particular, we're seeing the uptake of the likes of the World Building Standard, which is the one that seems to be gaining the most traction here in the UK and Europe. Now, this is founded in Delos in 2013. It's now managed by the International World Building Institute. And essentially, it's a system for measuring, certifying, and ensuring the ongoing health and well-being of the occupation of the people in that building. Now, it's an incredibly in-depth, comprehensive system, and within it allows you to accredit a building for one of three standards, for silver, gold, and platinum. And I think it's important to recognize this as a thing that is now happening, that it means that buildings can be certified. So it's a recognition that the design teams, that the owners, the organization of the buildings have recognized the importance of health and well-being in the built environment and the many benefits that can bring, not just for the building, but of course for the clients, the owners, and the building occupants. Now, it's worth mentioning because it is very comprehensive. It's currently in its stage 1. It's going to be moving into stage 2, where it diversifies a little bit more. But for the moment, the World Standard covers these 7 key concepts. Now, within it, it covers lots of sort of engineering-based subjects. So subjects that myself as a designer might know a little bit about, but maybe not specializing in. So things like air quality, water, the serving and delivery of food, light, very often become quite technical related subjects. But as we move down the list, we start to see more design related subjects. And in part, I think this is important because what it does suggest is that as a kind of stakeholders within the built environment development, we've got to recognize that people have to come together, that we do need facilities managers, we do need CEOs, sustainability managers, human resources, we do need engineers to all come together along with designers and play a part in delivering healthy buildings. And when you look down this list, you can start to recognize how different people will come in and contribute to these different aspects. As we move down the list, we start to see things like fitness. It's not about working out at the gym, but it is about how we encourage people to move around buildings through the positioning of features like stairs and particular offices or particular zones. As we move into comfort, it's about physical comfort, things like ergonomics, acoustics, and thermal issues. And mind is really about mental well-being. Now, it's this subject, the mind section, that I'm going to be talking about today, and about the impacts that buildings have on us as human beings, recognizing, as Haley said, we spend 90% of our lives indoors. So inevitably, the spaces that we surround ourselves in, of course, are going to have an enormous impact on our physical, our mental well-being, our emotional states, and quite simply, our ability to sit down and do a good day's work. Now, over the last 20 years, when we've talked about sustainable buildings, it's been primarily a carbon-centric conversation. And of course, we have a massive hill to climb there. So it's obvious that getting the physical, carbon-centered aspects of a building right are absolutely fundamental. We've got to understand the impacts our buildings have on the resources we're using, the materials we're using, and the circular economy. But having worked in that field for the last 20 years, I can tell you it's been a real tough slog getting people to engage with the idea of sustainability. And you all know from your own homes of how many people have actually managed to insulate your homes, thought about water use or water purity or air quality. It's stuff we know about, but we know it's really difficult to do. This chart kind of demonstrates quite neatly why businesses have not been engaging with sustainability. In part because they may be moving into buildings that they don't own, they might be renting buildings for short periods of time, but basically, the figure here, 1% of typical business operating costs are in energy, things like gas and electricity. So it's a relatively small amount. It's not like a massive amount compared to this human-centered issue of health and well-being. So 90% of typical business operating costs in staff, salaries and benefits. So clearly, the money people are spending on staff, in the cost of their daily operations is massive. So what I'm suggesting is that we don't park sustainability in the carbon-centric aspect. It's an important aspect, but we've got to recognize how much of a driver human health and well-being is and how that should be influencing the design of the spaces we're living and working in. Now, for a number of different reasons, health and well-being is affecting human occupation in buildings. Firstly, stress is an enormously damaging subject for occupation and building productivity. And in fact, the World Health Organization has stated that the stress-related conditions of cardiovascular disease and mental health issues are likely to be the two prime contributing factors to illness by 2020. A study by the Health and Safety Executive in the UK that came out in 2018 stated that stress accounts for 48% of all work-related ill health and 57% of all working days lost. So clearly stress is costing people a lot of money that could be spent on creating better, more productive environments. As well as that, as Hayley mentioned, we are moving into cities globally. In the UK, 90% of us live and work in urban centres and urbanised spaces. And technology, well, 90% of us in the UK now own smart technology. Probably that's 100% of you right here, right now. But think back 20 years ago, if you can, to before the advent of social media, before the advent of our smartphones. What were we doing with all that time? How were we working? Well, we'd work at maybe an old clunky laptop that wasn't that portable. Maybe we were working at a desktop. But when we turned around, we'd gaze out the window, we'd have a conversation with somebody, we might just relax, yeah? We might daydream, and that would be okay. That would be our opportunity to stop, to recuperate, to get some respite. Now what do? Well, we turn around, we're on our smartphones, we're on social media, we're WhatsApping, we're Instagramming, we're tweeting, we're looking at the news, the weather, but we don't give ourselves the opportunity to relax. We always have the sense of directed attention. We don't relax, and that can be enormously damaging. And if you look around at the modern office, how few places are actually delivering this sense of respite? It's kind of a real shame. It's a real missed opportunity. So biophilia. So if I was to ask you to think of a space where you feel most happy, calm and relaxed, the chances are the space that you're going to be thinking of is a space surrounded by nature, a space with water, trees, plants and light, and not just because I'm showing you a picture that reminds you of it. The reality is we all have an aspiration to be surrounded by nature, and the reason for that is in what's called biophilia. Now, I'll explain why this is important to all of you, first of all, and then demonstrate why it's important to your clients, but we've got to get this message embedded that it's something we all know. Yeah, and that's really important, that it's relevant to all of us. Biophilia is a universal design ethos that suggests that when we improve that human connection to nature, it can help to reduce stress and aid recuperation. And when we do that, we can help people to work better. Now, this idea of biophilia was invented by Eric Fromm, developed by Edward O. Wilson, and then it was created into a framework of ideas by the likes of Stephen Keller and Terrapin Bright Green, into what we now call the 14 patterns of biophilic design. Now, more than just being a thing that was invented in the 1980s, it was recognized in the 1980s. But essentially, it's an evolutionary design ethos that suggests that because of the vast amount of time that people have spent in and around healthy forms of nature for our very basic survival, it's left a sort of inheritance within us all. Now, if you think about it, for majority of human evolution, we've spent that time within healthy forms of nature, And many of the scenes that we see here would have been familiar to our forebearers. And in a sense, that residue does leave an impact into what we might understand of being spaces that are, and ideas that are still important to the spaces that are essential in our modern day lives. But these basic ideas are still there. That idea that we need shelter and warmth, security, access to food and fresh water and a sense of community. These are all still here. Yeah? We haven't moved on since the Industrial Revolution so much that we've left these ideas behind. Now, because of these ideas and evolution, an idea has been developed that helps us recognize the importance of it. And it's called the savanna theory. What it suggests is that when we look out onto lush, healthy environments, it actually has the ability to reduce heart rates and blood pressure levels, to help us to recuperate from intense periods of activity or stress. And what it suggests is that we actually have a genetic inheritance that allows us to very quickly recognize landscapes that can help us to survive, thrive and flourish, and equally to recognize landscapes that are potentially threatening. So the tricky thing about this is, how do we interpret these ideas into our busy, bustling, dense, geometric, urban environments in ways that are appropriate to the spaces, to the timeframes that we're working at, and of course to the costs? Because it's obvious we can't have a lush, healthy savanna. In fact, many of us can't even have a view onto trees. But we can interpret these ideas, and that's what biophilic design does. It does it in three key ways. And it talks about a direct connection to nature, how we bring real sensory forms of nature like water, trees, plants in. It talks about how we mimic nature in natural analogues using natural materials, colors, textures and patterns. And it talks about the sorts of spaces that are good for us, that make buildings exciting and stimulating and energizing, and we do need that. But equally to deliver on buildings that help us to relax and recuperate from periods of activity or stress. Now, these ideas have been most easily developed into what we now call the 14 patterns of biophilic design. And you see 7 patterns within the direct connection, 3 in the indirect, and another 4 in the human spatial response. And I'll run through those just kind of briefly. In this direct connection to nature, we have the visual connection onto plants and greenery. The non-visual is about using all those other different senses, sound, smell, touch, and taste, which we're understanding more and more can have a dramatic impact on productivity. It's about movement, which is what we call non-rhythmic sensory stimuli, movement that's always changing yet remains the same. It's very calming and relaxing and restorative. It might be about a deeper connection with those subtle changes that we see throughout the year, such as the seasons, incorporating water features and how we use air in spaces to subdivide spaces, to refresh people, to invigorate them. And it's also about natural light. And of course, we all know fundamentally that natural light enhances our experience of space. It creates more dynamic spaces with light and shade. It also gives us views out onto nature, connects us with the time of year, the time of day, landscape and topography. And there's one other reason why natural light is so fundamental to our well-being, and that's because of this. This is a chart of our circadian rhythms, and our circadian rhythms are our body's reactions to periods of light and dark across a 24-hour period. It affects our mood, behavior, and our hormone release. In particular, our body's release of melatonin and serotonin, which are our body's sleep-wake hormones. Now, the issue with this, really, is that because of our use of technology and our level of urbanization, we don't get this sort of exposure to these subtle changes in color temperature of light that we might do if we were living outside, or even if we're going on a holiday. Problem is that, because of our use of technology, and just picture yourself lying in bed at night, you've got the bedside light on, you're looking at your phone, it's the stimulating blue light that comes from your light, the stimulating blue light that comes from your phone, that stimulates your brain, energizes it, and reminds your brain it's actually more like the middle of the day than nighttime and dusk. Now, the problem with this use of technology is that essentially, we've taken our sleep very, very much for granted. But it goes without saying that our ability to sleep, to sleep at night, and also to be alert and awake in daytime has a dramatic impact on the way we function in buildings. And of course, we all know that. It's completely obvious. If we're tired, we don't function in the way we're supposed to. It does tend to make us a little bit irritable if we're tired. So it kind of decreases our interpersonal relationships with people. We know that if we're tired, we can't focus and concentrate, we get distracted. And in fact, we are also attracted to fatty foods, so there's a risk of diabetes, obesity, cancer, and even depression. Our exposure to natural light affects us in all sorts of ways. Moving on to this indirect connection, this is about how we bring natural materials, colors, textures, and patterns into the built environment. In so many of the spaces that we live in and we work in, we don't have those views out. We can't see trees, we very often don't have natural light. We're not often able to bring those into spaces. So this idea is really about how we mimic or evoke a feeling of nature using natural materials, colors, textures, and patterns. And as a designer, there is an enormous opportunity to evoke that feeling of nature using these opportunities in the built environment. What the research has suggested and is demonstrating more and more is that artificial elements of nature can facilitate stress relief. It can help us to relax. It's not as beneficial as real multi-sensory forms of nature, but it does play a part, and as an opportunity, it exists and it is real. There are 3 ways that we can do it. It's in shapes that we find in nature, it's in the use of natural materials, but also textures and patterns that bring visual richness into the space. And moving on to the idea of the human spatial response, which is about exciting and stimulating people. It's about a sense of prospect, helping people to understand some of the activity in buildings, but also a sense of retreat, how we recognize that people do get stressed, do get tired, that we need to be incorporating spaces within buildings and workplaces where people can just take 5 minutes out, gazing out onto nature or water feature to surround them with natural colors and textures and patterns and even technologies. Because what the research demonstrates is that when we improve that human connection to nature in the workplace, it can have 2 very clear benefits. It can help to reduce costs, things like absenteeism, staff turnover, and presenteeism, but it can also improve basic outcomes, things like productivity, creativity, communication, and engagement. So these are 2 really important things. And what's interesting about the research is it starts to create a business case. The metrics that we're seeing from these studies from as way back as 20 to 30 years ago demonstrate again and again in different ways how we can bring different elements of biophilic design into the workplace to improve human well-being, and when we do that, it's got a measurable benefit to those people. In this particular study, where there's a good view out, it's shown to improve test and mental recall and functioning by 10 to 25%. In this study, when natural features have been applied, there's a 15% reduction in absenteeism, so cutting costs. In this one study by Interface, they found that actually when natural features were applied to the workplace, there's a 15% higher level of well-being, a 6% rise in productivity, and a 15% higher level of creativity. So again and again, what it's demonstrating is a real demonstration of the value that we can deliver as designers of our services into the built environment, into the workplace, that benefits occupants and of course our clients. And these benefits extend into all other areas. I think particularly relevant more and more are the benefits that we're seeing in education settings, where the optimization of natural light has been shown to increase the speed of learning, reduce absenteeism, and increase test results by between 5 and 14%. And interestingly, when we talk about the benefits of materials, this one particular study by the Joanneum Research Institute demonstrated that actually when timber walls are used in classrooms, they have the ability to reduce students' heart rates and blood pressure levels, and in fact reduce heart rates by an amazing 8,600 beats per day. So that's just your choice of materials. The opportunities go on, and I think at this moment we do have an opportunity to develop and explore that more and more. Now, of course, there are many, many barriers to introducing biophilic design and well-being in general into the built environment. In my own design practice, this is something that we really focus on in our research studies. In particular, we're looking for different strategies that allow us to bring biophilic design in at the very simple level and recognize the opportunities that exist around a building, but also some of the amazing things that we can deliver. On the left-hand side, this is an installation that we designed and actually installed in a very short amount of time in a showroom in London using real forms of nature and artificial elements combined. And on the right-hand side, this is a proposal by Thomas Heatherwick and Bark Ingles Group for Google's Mountain View. And what we are seeing is those at the very forefront of workplace design, comes like Apple, Amazon, and Google, are recognizing the enormous benefits of introducing elements of nature to attract staff, to get them to work better, to get them to communicate, and also to retain staff. Now, we've taken these ideas of workplace strategies and separated them into three different approaches: the low, medium, and high. The low might be what you do to an existing space, the medium and a low-scale design project, and the high cost, which is really about incorporating some of the amazing materials and technologies that are now available. We've developed this into this guide called In Creating Positive Spaces Using Biophilic Design, and you can download this from our website, which is oliverheathdesign.com. It's supposed to be a creative guide that inspires positive thinking about how we can look at biophilic design and think about it from a very low cost right up to the high cost. It's backed up by lots and lots of research and some really fascinating case studies. Now, we're also taking these ideas into a live office project at the Building Research Establishment, which Flavia is also going to talk about next. This is a project that we've been doing for about a year now. It's a 3-year project. The idea is that we're taking one floor of this building in the campus at the BRE in Watford. We're going to spend a year measuring the occupants, the spaces within it in a quantitative and qualitative study. This is a space that they're currently working in. It's a 1980s building. It was at one point then very cutting edge and clearly looks incredibly dated now. Long corridors, sort of very musty kind of tobacco hue light, very unloved interior spaces, but clearly a building that offers opportunities like many buildings across the UK. Enormous opportunities exist. And that's what we're going to be investigating. This is the current floor plan. We're currently, there are 3 different groups working within the building, and what we're going to be doing is investigating biophilic design in 3 different ways, and then delivering it at a low level, medium and high cost level within the floor plan. The idea really is that we want to investigate and demonstrate the different strategies and demonstrate the return on investment for how you might bring it in at the simple, medium and high level. At the far end, we also have a co-working innovation zone, and we're working with a number of core partners on this, companies like Coelux, Plantronics, Interface, who are inputting different materials and different knowledge, and there's actually a little test case area in blue where they're going to be testing some of their innovation as well. And just to demonstrate our approach, these are some visuals that we've created. This is the low cost area, so it's really the very, very simplest things you can do, low cost. This is the medium level, using different materials, technologies. There's a little meditation space, an enhanced level of planting and lighting. And finally, into the Wilson area, this is the kind of the upper level, using some amazing technologies, using artificial light, biomorphic materials and colors and shapes and forms. Plantronics soundscaping system. There's some amazing partners on this. If you'd like to know more about it, Flavia's going to tell you more. You can sign up to the BREBiophiliCoffice.com and find out more. We're going to be outputting information over the next 2 years. Health and well-being is clearly a very big and diverse subject. It's something that the World Standard has researched very well. It's a very comprehensive approach. And within that exists a real opportunity for designers to input. And for me, it's the living embodiment of health and well-being that I think is demonstrated by biophilic design, that demonstrates benefits for building occupants who get to experience a greater level of health and well-being, for us in the design industry who get to deliver better buildings, and of course for building owners who get to experience some of the tangible financial returns on the uplift in productivity and the reduction in costs like absenteeism. Biophilic design is just one part of the creation of happy and healthier places to live and work, but I believe an essential and beautiful aesthetic one. Thank you very much.